Okay, so after the popularity of my previous review and examination of the low light performance of the DJI Action 6 versus the Ace Pro 2, I've decided to do a much deeper dive. Now, I don't normally do this. I don't normally do camera comparisons in this way. Pixel peeping, for me, I find it something that, you know, we don't watch video with our noses stuck up against a television set or our phones or whatever device we're watching on. So sometimes pixel peeping for me is a bit of overkill. But when we're talking about matching with other cameras, when we're talking about grading and using much more complex workflows, you know, I know a lot of people who watch my channel are creative people and they want to do much more with these action cameras than just basic filming. On the other side, there are people who watch who they want to film their sports that they do, and they just want a good looking picture straight out of the camera. They don't want any kind of grading ability. So this video is for the pixel peepers. This is for the people who want to nerd out on the real differences between the image quality of the Action 5, the Action 6, and the Ace Pro 2. Now, I want to say from the very outset that this is not designed to show any camera up. This is not to say this camera is terrible. They all have their little quirks and issues, but it's undeniable that there are some clear differences in how the image is processed in these cameras. Now, I know the manufacturers do watch this channel, so, you know, this is constructive analysis of the image of these cameras. And for people like me and the users of these cameras who are watching this channel, hopefully this will result in better processing and a better image in future cameras. Now, one of the reasons that I don't do these kinds of tests very often is because comparing cameras in a fair way is a pretty difficult thing to do. Ideally, you really need a lab setting. So I don't want anyone watching these tests to take my results as gospel, but in these tests, I'm looking at them in real world settings. So, you know, that has its own validity in itself. But as I say, I'm not here to criticize or rag on any particular camera or manufacturer. That's not the point of this at all. It's out of interest to see what the real difference is in the image quality and the image processing of these different cameras are. Now, I haven't included the GoPro, and the main reason for that is because a lot of these tests are going to involve low light. There's not really much point in comparing a GoPro in low light to the DJI and Insta360 cameras. But I might do a GoPro in a future video. Maybe when the Hero 14 comes out, I can look at that compared with the current competition. So I've split up the tests into a few different videos. This was getting very long, so I've split them up into more manageable chunks. This one will be looking at the standard color profile and the log profiles of the cameras. And then in future videos, I'm going to be looking at the low light performance and how you can improve the settings on those low light modes to improve the performance of the camera. So anyway, grab yourself a drink because this is a long one. And yeah, let's get to it. Okay, so I've set up a few different shots here comparing the different Action cameras, the Action 5 Pro, the Action 6 and the Ace Pro 2. So before I get into the detail, I just want to play you through the shots first. So we'll start with the standard color profile. This is a backlit shot of me running along. You'll be able to see the three different variations from the different cameras, and then we'll do a bit more of a detailed analysis on that. So just take a look at these shots and then we'll get into the detail. Okay, so this is using the default color profiles. Action 5 is now back into sports stabilization. Again, sharpness set to minimum, but the default noise reduction on the DJI cameras. Okay, so this is using the default color profiles. Action 5 is now back into sports stabilisation. Get sharpness set to minimum, but the default noise reduction on the DJI cameras. Okay, so this is using the default colour profiles. Action 5 is now back into sports stabilisation. Again, sharpness set to minimum, but the default noise reduction on the DJI cameras. Okay, so this is using the default colour profiles. Action 5 is now back into sports stabilisation. Again, sharpness set to minimum, but the default noise reduction on the DJI cameras. So you've had a look at the standard colour profile backlit shots here. We've got 3 different versions. So the thing to understand about standard colour profiles is they're generally set up to give kind of most wham bam image for people who just want a good looking image out of the box, and they often come quite over sharpened, over processed maybe. Even with the texture and sharpness set to -2, as I have done with both DJI cameras, and I've set the Ace Pro 2 as well to a -2 setting, we can immediately see on the Action 5, you can see these trees in the back. They look pretty ugly. And although it might not be so obvious here, in certain conditions you do get this white outlining around the trees. It's very harsh looking, but as you can see, even here, these branches look very harsh in that backlit sunlight. They're not very gracefully rendered. And this is a common criticism of the Action 5 Pro. I don't know why this is. When you set the sharpening down to minimum, you would expect it to not apply any sharpening. So I think it's coming as a result of its attempt at HDR style tone mapping, creating these artifacts. I'm not entirely sure why it is, but I do know it's pretty ugly. On the Action 6, it still has that effect, but it's less harsh. You can see the tree branches here are a bit more gracefully rendered. If we go back to the Action 5, you can see it's a bit more coarse compared with the Action 6. So although the Action 6 is an improvement, it's still suffering from the same kind of effects, and you can see when we put it into full screen, yeah, it's not particularly great looking. Now looking at my face here, it's a little bit plasticky looking, I suppose. This is the Action 5, then this is the Action 6. So I mean, looking at the vector scope, skin tone here on the Action 6, and don't forget this is just auto white balance in the camera, fairly near the skin tone indicator line. Same here, bit more red, a bit less saturated on the Action 6. Now the Ace Pro 2, a little bit noisier, but it's probably rendered my face here a little bit more graceful, but as you can see, it is much more red than the other two. But if you look at the Ace Pro 2 on these trees, it does do a strange kind of effect where the branches are there, but they kind of look a bit abstract to me. If you compare that with the tree branches on the other 2 cameras, they're kind of lacking in fine detail. They sort of look like abstract tree branches. It's a very difficult scenario for these cameras to render because the sun is shining straight down the barrel of the camera lens. So it is difficult for the camera to render these aspects. But even if we go into the tree branches up here where the sunlight isn't, it looks a bit painterly. It looks a bit like an abstract painting in some ways. They're not defined tree branches. It's very, very odd. If you compare that with the tree branches on the DJI, although it's ugly in the direct sunlight, they are distinct branches in the general rendering. But here, it just looks a bit strange. These standard colour profiles, I'm not a fan of them. at all. They do tend to produce these artifacts, and I think a lot of the criticisms about the image quality on the Action 6 and even the Action 5 kind of stem from people using the default color profile. And even if they're using the dlog M profile, you still need to tune the sharpness and the texture settings. So that's what we'll have a look at next. So again, dlog and ilog, fixed aperture. Stabilization is set to sport on my Action 6 and obviously high on the Ace Pro 2. Something I'd forgotten is that in dlog M, the Action 5 doesn't allow you to select the sport stabilization option. So again, dlog and ilog, fixed aperture. Stabilization is set to sport on my Action 6 and obviously high on the Ace Pro 2. Something I'd forgotten is that in dlog M, the Action 5 doesn't allow you to select the sport stabilization option. So again, dlog and ilog, fixed aperture. Stabilization is set to sport on my Action 6 and obviously high on the Ace Pro 2. Something I'd forgotten is that in dlog M, the Action 5 doesn't allow you to select the sport stabilization option. So again, dlog and ilog, fixed aperture. Stabilization is set to sport on my Action 6 and obviously high on the Ace Pro 2. Something I'd forgotten is that in dlog M, the Action 5 doesn't allow you to select the sport stabilization option. So again, dlog and ilog, fixed aperture. Stabilization is set to sport on my Action 6 and obviously high on the Ace Pro 2. Something I'd forgotten is that in dlog M, the Action 5 doesn't allow you to select the sport stabilization option. So again, dlog and ilog, fixed aperture. Stabilization is set to sport on my Action 6 and obviously high on the Ace Pro 2. Something I'd forgotten is that in dlog M, the Action 5 doesn't allow you to select the sport stabilization option. So again, dlog and ilog, fixed aperture. Stabilization is set to sport on my Action 6 and obviously high on the Ace Pro 2. Something I'd forgotten is that in dlog M, the Action 5 doesn't allow you to select the sport stabilization option. So again, dlog and ilog, fixed aperture. Stabilization is set to sport on my Action 6 and obviously high on the Ace Pro 2. Something I'd forgotten is that in dlog M, the Action 5 doesn't allow you to select the sport stabilization option. So again, dlog and ilog, fixed aperture. Stabilization is set to sport on my Action 6 and obviously high on the Ace Pro 2. something I've forgotten is that in dlog M, the Action 5 doesn't allow you to select the sports stabilization option. Okay, so we're looking at the ungraded dlog, and again, I've tuned the texture and sharpness down to -2. I've left the noise reduction at default, just to make it even between the Ace Pro 2 and these cameras. Now, we can see here that if we put the manufacturer's LUT on the Action 5, so this is just the LUT put straight onto the Action 5 Pro, and we'll zoom in. It's quite red on here in this backlit scenario, but what we can see is that trees are looking a bit better. They're not suffering from quite the harshness, that kind of odd over-processed look that we had in the previous shot. And yeah, I am in a slightly different location, but still, you can still see these tree branches are nowhere near as poorly rendered as they were in the standard colour profile, which is here. I mean, look at the difference between the dlog M with the manufacturer's LUT applied and this. So if we go to the Action 6, and again, the manufacturer's LUT, again, it's a much better rendering of these trees in the background, much more pleasing detail with it set to -2. Again, my skin is probably a little bit on the red side. So if we look at my custom grade, yeah, skin tone's a bit more in the right place. But let's take a look at the Ace Pro 2. What we can see here, these trees, they're slightly better rendered, I think. I don't think it's done as good a job as the DJI quite, but it is better than the default colour profile. But we can see an immediate issue here with the Ace Pro 2 in this mode, in this iLog mode. If we look at the vector scope here, I've got it on a 2x zoom so that you can see the effects of this. Actually, even if I take that off, let's turn the grade off, you can see just how little colour information there is. And this is in an 8-bit tonal range that the camera records in, because the Ace Pro 2 does not have 10-bit colour. And if we turn on the grade, you can see the quantization effects immediately in the vector scope here. And if I zoom in, you know, it's incredibly apparent, the limitations of that 8-bit recording, and you can see it in my facial detail. The tonal range is not there, it's not very subtle. If we compare that with the Action 6, look at how smooth that tonal range is compared with the Ace Pro 2. And that's as a result of the 8-bit recording system. It just doesn't have the tonal range available to put in such a flat log profile. I don't like using the word flat because it's really the incorrect terminology, but a lot of people understand the word flat. There's just not the colour information there compared with the Action 6, where you have this lovely smooth tonal range. So that is a limitation of the Ace Pro, and we can see it as well if we look at this foliage. If we look at the grass down here, now just look at the detail on the Action 6 and also on the Action 5. You've got this detail in the foliage here. Now if we go to the Ace Pro 2, it just doesn't have the same detail. You can see the limitations of that tonal range. It just looks coarser, it looks rougher, and there just doesn't seem to be the detail in that foliage, the subtle detail, because detail isn't just about pixels, it's also about subtle color detail as well, which can help bring out that detail in the foliage. And on the Ace Pro 2 in iLog mode, it just isn't there, and you can see in the background here, it just looks a bit mushy and lacking in definition, whereas on the Action 6 you've got much more subtle tones here that show up the texture much more. Something else to look at is the detail in my jacket. Now again, this is the Action 6, and you can see the ripstop detail in the jacket. And if we go to the Action 5, the Action 5 hasn't done such a great job either, but you can still see a little bit of the ripstop detail. It's not as good as the Action 6, but we can see it here. We can see some of that ripstop detail here, and back to the Action 5 again, and it's quite well shown on the Action 6. But if we go to the Ace Pro 2, and you can see really that ripstop detail isn't really there. It's kind of there, but I think a lot of that subtle texture is lost in that 8-bit recording bucket. You see, it just looks coarser. You can see the posterization of the way that those tones are rendered compared with the Action 6. Now, the manufacturer's LUT, it still looks a little bit coarse compared with the Action 6. And it's about tonal subtlety, as I say, because the Ace Pro 2 doesn't have that tonal range available to it because of that 8-bit recording bucket. Now, obviously, that's going to be improved quite a lot with the introduction of 10-bit, if Insta360 ever does that. But iLog in its current setup just isn't suitable for grading, really, because of this tonal limitation. As I say, you can see that. You can see the way the quantization effects of that tonal range into that log recording have had this effect on the tonal rendering. What I will say with the Ace Pro 2 is this sun looks pretty nice in the background here. It's got a warmer look that you'd expect in that kind of afternoon scenario, whereas it's a bit colder on the Action 6 and on the Action 5. So that's a backlit scenario, which is quite difficult for cameras to render. So let's take a look at a frontlit scenario. Standard color profile again. Standard colour profile again. Standard colour profile again. Standard colour profile again. Okay, so let's take a look at the front lit situations with the standard colour profile. Now, it's not looking too bad here. I don't see any particular orange. This is the British sunlight in winter, but it was pretty head-on straight into my face, so it's still a good test. When we come out into the brightness on the Action 5, things do get a bit bit orangey. It's trying to use that HDR tone mapping. But overall, it's not as ugly as it was in the backlit scenario. These trees, yeah, they look okay to me. You can see the texture on my jacket here as well. You can clearly see the ripstop detail going on there. So here, kind of gone a bit into the shadow. It's passable. It's completely passable. So let's take a look at the Action 6 in the standard color profile now. This looks a bit more contrasty actually. I found the opposite in my review. If we compare the Action 5 to the Action 6, I have to say in this situation, I'm preferring the look of the Action 5. And if we look at this close up when it's in the bright sunlight, the Action 6 has, yeah, that's probably a better one. That's when it's really bright. See around here, if we compare that with the Action 5, I think the Action 6 has actually done a quite noticeably better job at rendering the subtle detail and texture in that direct bright sunlight than the Action 5 Pro. So yeah, maybe I'm going to change my mind on that. I think the Action 6 has handled the extreme light situation better than the Action 5 Pro. And again, you know, you can see the ripstop detail on the jacket there. And that's kind of important because it just shows the texture reproduction. Now, if we look at the Ace Pro 2, okay, yeah, look at that. Yeah, that is not looking particularly great, is it? It's not a great rendering of my... It does make me look like I've just drunk about 100 pints of beer. That's not a particularly great look. This is a standard color profile, so I don't want to be too harsh, but also because, as I say, standard color profiles are not that great really all around. But if we look at the general gist of this picture, you can still see some of the quantization going on with the 8-bit recording in the camera. My skin is looking very blotchy. Can we compare that to the Action 6? It's not a very flattering look. And if we look at the detail again in the back, if we look at these trees, it's just mushy. If we look at this area here and this foliage on the side of the bank, and we compare that to the Action 6, I mean, look at the difference in detail there. And in these trees here, you've got much more fine texturing going on. And you can see as well, if you look at these power lines, this is a 200% zoom and they're still smooth. But if we look at the Ace Pro 2, look at this. What's this going on? They stay smooth on the Action 6. But you've got this really rough looking on the Ace Pro 2. And again, as I say, look at this texture in the trees. The subtlety and fine detail just isn't there compared with the Action 6 or even the Action 5. But I think the Action 6 has definitely actually done a better job here than the Action 5, I think, rendering more realistic tones in those greens. But look at that on the Ace Pro 2. And keep going between them and you can see there's a vast difference there. And again, if we look at on the Ace Pro 2, if we zoom into my jacket, there is pretty much no subtle detail there. The texture of the ripstop material just really isn't visible at all on the Ace Pro 2. So although I turned the sharpness down on the Ace Pro 2 down to minimum, that shouldn't get rid of detail. What turning the sharpness down should do is give you the natural detail that the camera produces. If you have the sharpness on default, all that's doing is enhancing detail that's already there. So putting it down to the minimum, setting it to low, shouldn't eradicate detail. It should show you all the detail ready for you to be able to do post sharpening on it, you know, to tune it exactly how you want it. But that's not what's happening here. The camera just isn't rendering that detail. So that's the standard color profile again. Let's take a look at the log modes. Okay, Frontlit sun, dlog or ilog as well, and EV set to neutral. Okay, Frontlit sun, dlog or ilog as well, and EV set to neutral. Okay, frontlit sun, dlog or ilog as well, and EV set to neutral. Dlog or ilog as well, and EV set to neutral. Dlog or ilog as well, and EV set to neutral. Dlog or ilog as well, and EV set to neutral. Okay, frontlit sun, dlog or ilog as well, and EV set to neutral. Okay, frontlit sun, dlog or ilog as well, and EV set to neutral. Okay, frontlit sun, dlog or ilog as well, and EV set to neutral. Okay, frontlit sun, dlog or ilog as well, and EV set to neutral. Okay, frontlit sun, dlog or ilog as well, and EV set to neutral. Okay, so here we have the Action 5 Pro in dlog M ungraded. Also got the Action 6 ungraded, and we have the Ace Pro 2 ungraded. This is with the manufacturer's LUT on the Action 5 Pro. You see the face to me looks very red, although when I hover over the skin tone indicator, it is on the red side for sure. It's not hugely though, you know, this skin tone line indicator, it's not a hard and fast rule. Just having it generally there, either side of it is fine, depending on your, you know, your preference. On the Action 6, the skin tone is pretty much bang on that line. So we'll just show you that again. That's the Action 5. And this is the Action 6. So I think with the manufacturer's LUT applied, the Action 6 does look better in terms of the way it reproduces skin. And let's take a look at the Ace Pro 2. Now, the Ace Pro 2 actually, it's quite neutral, the skin tone, just doing a, you know, an okay job of that. And it's a fairly pleasing image. It's got a certain look, a very distinct look to it. But again, you can still see the quantization effects of cramming all that tone in the iLog mode down into that 8-bit container is just causing that loss of color resolution. And it's very evident on the vector scope. And when we zoom in, we can see things like the background, just how much more detailed the image is on the DJI cameras. And again, if we look at the Ace Pro 2, there is pretty much no, a little bit of ripped up detail there, perhaps. It is mostly gone. But if we compare that to the Action 6, and that's how the texture generally looks in real life. Whereas here, it's just not there. And again, we can see in the face, just subtle tonal detail that just doesn't make it compared with the Action 6 and the Action 5, although the Action 5 is looking a little bit bright and red and overexposed. But we're looking at the tonal reproduction and the way detail is shown. And in this foliage in the back, again, that 10-bit recording is showing itself quite evidently. It just looks it just looks lacking in subtle tonal detail compared with this. You know, you've got all these little subtleties of texture and detail that are showing on the Action 6 that are just not showing themselves on the Ace Pro 2. You look at the tree in this background here, most of that detail goes to mush. And I'm going to show you my custom grade in a moment, where I've added the sharpening back in. But anyway, let's go to the grade, my custom grade. By the way, don't at me about my grade because, you know, I make no claims to be a colorist. That's why you won't find any real color grading tutorials on my channel, because that's not my area of expertise in any way, shape or form. For that, you head over to a channel such as the absolutely superb Darren Mostyn channel. Darren is a friend of Red Shark, which I used to be the editor of, and you know what he doesn't know about color grading isn't worth knowing. So head on over there if you want to know about color grading. So don't at me about my particular color grades. I'm doing this for illustrative purposes only. Again, as we can see here, this is the Action 5 Pro. I've dialed back in a little bit of sharpness on these. You might think I've overdone it, but whatever. Again, skin tone pretty much bang on there. I'm a very pasty white person, so my skin tone probably does fall directly on the skin tone line. But you see all this subtlety in this grass area in the back here. And I realise we're pixel peeping and you don't do that normally. I understand that, you know. I don't normally pixel peep to this level, but again, I want to show the differences in how these cameras are rendering the image. You know, the ripstop detail, I'm going to keep pointing it out. This is the Action 6. It's the ungraded image. That's the graded image. Again, skin tone is bang on that skin tone line. There are subtle textures going on and subtle tonal details going on in the face. Here, my beard, which some people in the comments in the past have criticised me for not shaving. Tough. I don't shave very often. But yeah, you can see again all the sort of detail in this grass area on the path. And we go to the Ace Pro 2. Again, the detail just isn't it's just not there. This is with sharpening applied in post as well. So it's not left to the default camera sharpness. We come out into the sunlight there. And I've tried to grade these as fairly as I can, as equally as I can. Again, you can see the limits of the 8-bit recording bucket there. Very evident on the vector scope. And yeah, turn the grading off. Skin tone, again, it's pretty neutral, pretty nicely, rendered there in the bright sunshine. Again, if we go into the bright sunshine again, and we'll zoom in to my jacket, again, it's very, very subtle, the texture. You can just about see some of the ripstop nature, but it's not very evident. And again, in my face, look at the way the hair on my face and the tonal subtlety in the face compared with the Action 6. Even in that bright sunlight, look at the subtlety of tone and the way that my beard is rendered, the hairs, individual hairs there, compared with the Ace Pro 2, which looks very coarse, actually fairly rough and noisy in some ways. And as I say, I know that we don't view an image like this in real life. We don't watch the television with our noses stuck up against the screen. I understand that. But if you're getting one of these cameras and you're going to be grading with them and using them and intercutting with other cameras, or you've seen other reviews where they are just superficially using the standard color profile and then saying, oh, I don't like the look of that camera compared with that camera, but they're missing all the other details, such as that tonal reproduction and such as how it's actually reproducing detail, then you're missing a lot of the information that you need in order to compare these cameras. Now, the Ace Pro 2, a lot of the problems with the Ace Pro 2 that I'm showing you here are down to its 8-bit recording system. iLog is too much for an 8-bit recording system. If Insta360 put 10-bit on it, it would transform it in terms of the grading ability and what you're seeing here on the vector scope. I mean, you can see it, it's night and day. We look at that on the Action 6, and you can just see how smooth that 10-bit recording system makes that tonal range. It's just so much better. So that's a look at some shots that are taken in harsh sunlight, frontlit and backlit, with the stabilization. Now let's take a look at some of the other aspects of these cameras, including different ISO settings and low light performance.